Maybe you didn't mean to click on this video. It just appeared on a very ordinary day. No major event, nothing particularly special. Just something inside you felt tired. Tired enough to no longer want more answers. You just wanted to sit down, to be still, to hear something that doesn't try to teach you, but simply stays with you. Maybe you've been strong for too long, not because you wanted to be, but because no one gave you another choice. You've learned to keep everything inside. You're used to being the calm one in the chaos of family, the reliable one, the stable one, the mature one, so much so that even you have forgotten who you were before you became the version that made others feel at ease. But somewhere deep within, something still quietly lives, something you can't quite name. It's not loud, not logical, not reasonable. It's just that when you sit alone, in the soft fading light of late afternoon, your heart whispers, maybe I haven't truly healed. Maybe I've just gotten good at hiding it. Maybe you once believed healing must be noble. You must let go with strength. You must stay positive, forgive, move forward. But still, there are nights when you lie still and feel yourself pulled back into old versions of who you were. The woman who carried it all on her shoulders. The woman who clenched her teeth when no one stood beside her. The woman who smiled softly as her heart quietly cracked. And you wonder, is there a way to hold all of those versions without erasing any of them? Carl Jung once said, "We do not heal by becoming brighter and brighter, but by making the darkness conscious." We don't need to become someone new. We only need to call back every part of ourselves we once rejected. Every fear, every mistake, every memory you tried to forget, every version of yourself you once hated. In this video, we won't talk about healing as something to achieve. We won't offer poetic affirmations or pretty words. We will simply sit down, gently, honestly, and begin a quiet journey. A journey of integration, so you no longer have to split yourself into pieces to keep going. If even a small part of your heart feels seen right now, stay, because the next few minutes aren't for trying to understand more. They're for helping you remember something very old, something your soul has always known. Healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about finally stopping the rejection of yourself. There is no thunderclap to announce the moment you begin to awaken. No anniversary, no magical light descending from the sky. It's just a morning, a very small moment. Maybe you're standing in the kitchen. The water is boiling, and for the first time in years, you're not rushing to do something else. You're simply standing there, and your heart quietly says, "That's enough." Not enough because you've achieved something grand, but because you're tired enough, quiet enough, distant enough from yourself, enough of living as if you were someone else, enough of forcing yourself to be cheerful, to be fine, to be strong, enough of conversations where you vanish just to keep the peace, enough of sleepless nights followed by smiling mornings because everyone needs you. And then, when you simply can't force yourself anymore, when the old mask no longer fits your real face, something small happens. You stop fighting yourself, not because you've found the solution, not because you're ready to forgive everything, but simply because you don't have the strength to keep waging war inside. You let go, but not of life. You let go of resisting your true self. Maybe you've been living, succeeding, achieving for years, but deep inside, a part of you was left behind. The part that is afraid, the part that was hurt, the imperfect part, the part that didn't know how to get it right. And you've tried to fix it, erase it, as if it were the thing that made you weak. But what you didn't expect is that when you stop, when you sit beside that part of yourself, when you no longer ask, "Why are you like this?" and instead gently say, "I see you," something miraculous begins to happen. You stop splitting yourself apart. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. who looks inside, awakens, and you, in that very moment of sitting with yourself, began to wake up. Awakening doesn't come from long meditations or expensive retreats. It comes from a truth that can no longer be delayed. From the moment you stop pretending that you're not angry, not sad, not jealous, not vulnerable. From the moment you face the parts of yourself you've hidden and no longer find them unworthy, you begin to see yourself like a river, not a still lake, but a moving current, sometimes fast, sometimes quiet, sometimes clear, sometimes murky, but always alive. When you stop fighting yourself, you don't become more perfect, but you become more real. You don't become someone who always controls their emotions, but you no longer see emotions as the enemy. You still make mistakes, but you stop imprisoning yourself under the label of mistake. And that is where integration begins. Not fixing, not erasing memories, but allowing every part of you to have space, even the part that was selfish, that was fragile, that chose the wrong person, that lived for others' approval, that once believed, I'm not enough to be loved. All of those parts, you no longer avoid them. You invite them back to sit beside you, not to scold, just to be together for the first time, without fear. And from that place, something surprising happens. You no longer feel alone, even if you're still alone in the same old room, because now you are fully present with yourself. When you stop fighting yourself, things don't instantly get easier, but they do become clearer. You no longer need to justify your exhaustion. You allow it to be what it is. You no longer need to prove you are worthy. You know, you've always been worthy just because you exist. You begin speaking to yourself in a completely different way. I don't have to be fast. I don't have to understand everything to be allowed to rest. I don't need anyone's permission to accept myself. And slowly, integration begins, not loudly, not dramatically, just a new breeze stirring quietly inside your chest. You start breathing deeper, sleeping more peacefully, eating more slowly, smiling less, but more sincerely. You stop searching for a better life. You begin truly living the life you already have. Awakening is not a destination. It's the moment you stop rejecting your soul, even for one more second. You've already begun the journey. From the moment you stopped fighting yourself, from a very young age, you were taught how to use your mind, to analyze, to plan, to solve problems. You learned to think in order to survive, but no one taught you how to feel. No one ever told you that pain doesn't just live in memory, it also lives in the body. How many hardships have you been through? How many wounds that words could never express? You pushed through, endured, carried on as if nothing happened. But the body remembers. It never forgets. It remembers every time you held back tears to keep the family peace. Every time you smiled while your back ached with exhaustion. Every time you held your child while feeling utterly empty inside. You may think you've forgotten, but your shoulders still tense every time you walk into a crowded room. Your stomach still aches when you have to say no. Your chest still tightens when you smile through hollow conversations. That's not just muscle tension. That's unhealed memory. We often speak of healing as something for the mind, but in truth, integration begins in the body, because the body is where everything has happened. It is living memory. It's the map of every version you've ever been. It's where your rage was swallowed, where your tears were never allowed to fall, where your voice was cut off, and later silenced by your own choice. Carl Jung once wrote, "The body never lies. It tells the truth, even when you're not ready to hear it." And then one day, you begin to listen, not with your ears, not with your mind, but with your full presence in every sensation. You start sitting down, placing your hand over your chest, not asking, "Why am I sad?" but simply whispering, "I'm here with you." You don't need to understand everything. You just need to stop abandoning your body. You let yourself breathe truly, not the rushed breath of someone always chasing the clock, but a breath fully anchored in the present moment. You let yourself eat slowly, not just to ease the hunger, but to feel yourself existing. You let yourself sleep without effort, not as an escape, but by surrendering the need to be useful even in your dreams. And then you start hearing the smallest sounds, a slight ache in your neck telling you you've held your head up too long to appear strong, a tightness in your chest reminding you of all the words you've swallowed, a shallow breath showing how long you've been holding your breath just to not disturb anyone. When you begin listening to your body, you're not just healing physically, you're opening the door for your soul to return. Because the soul cannot reside in a body that's been abandoned. It needs a space that is warm, that listens, that is present, that loves without condition. And so you begin to live in your body as if it were a sacred home. You clean it gently, wipe away the dust with compassion. You lift the curtains, not so others can see you, but so the light can come in. Integration begins the moment you stop leaving yourself, when you stop running every time emotion rises, when you no longer flinch every time memory knocks. You learn to stay, even with a tremble, a tight knot, a single tear. There is nothing more miraculous than a woman who once got lost in roles, expectations, and obligations, now returning to her body, as if reconnecting with an old, forgotten friend. You no longer need advanced techniques, just one hand over your heart and a whisper. You can speak now. You won't be ignored anymore. And from that moment, every other integration mind, emotion, memory can truly begin, because now your soul knows you've come back to yourself. I no longer live only in my head. I'm learning to live in my body, and that is where I've finally begun to truly live. There is a kind of wound that's hard to name. It doesn't show like a scar. It doesn't scream like tears. It doesn't shatter like a breakdown. It simmers quietly, and it feels familiar. It's the pain you inflict on yourself. Every time you whisper to your mind, I'm so stupid. I should have known better. Why do I always mess things up? Maybe I'm just not good enough to be loved. You don't say these things out loud, but you hear them every day. You hear them when you look in the mirror. You hear them when you miss a deadline. You hear them when you don't have the energy to be the perfect mom. You hear them when you forget something and someone frowns, and you immediately conclude, I'm a failure. No one sees you hurting yourself because you're still polite, still nurturing, still okay. But inside, there's a quiet punishment unfolding every single day. This is something many women don't recognize. We become so used to sacrificing that we begin to trade away the kindness meant for ourselves. Then one day, when you're too tired to blame yourself anymore, when you sit quietly by the window or in the early kitchen light, a very small part of you whispers, why am I treating myself this way? It's not that you suddenly learn how to love yourself. It's just, you no longer have the energy to keep punishing yourself. And that is when inner compassion begins to awaken, not through grand affirmations, not through mantras on the wall, but through the gentle presence that arrives for the first time in years. You begin to notice how you speak to yourself when you mess up. Before, why do you always ruin everything? Now, yeah, I made a mistake, but I'm still learning. Before, no one would ever want someone like me. Now, maybe not everyone will understand, and that's okay. I no longer need others to validate my worth. You start speaking to yourself like a best friend, not like a supervisor, not like a harsh teacher, but like a mother within, holding the little girl who grew up in silence. You begin to apologize to yourself, not because you were wrong, but because you abandoned your feelings for far too long. You say sorry for forcing yourself to be okay when your heart was breaking, for not allowing yourself to rest, for treating your own kindness as something excessive, for living as if you didn't deserve to be held. Then you learn something. Gentleness doesn't make you weak. It makes you more human. It makes you pause to breathe. When before you would have pushed on, it helps you say no with grace, instead of saying yes while choking back your truth. It makes you place a hand on your heart when emotions rise and no longer feel ashamed for being too sensitive. Carl Jung once emphasized, we cannot reach enlightenment without first facing the darkness. But he also knew darkness cannot be beaten out. It only dissolves when it's seen with love, and you are learning to love the darkness within you. Not because it's beautiful, not because it's changed, not because you've improved, but simply because it's part of you and it deserves to exist. You will realize one of the hardest things is also one of the most sacred. To stop harming yourself through your own thoughts. Compassion is not indulgence. It's inner fairness. It's when you allow yourself to be tired without labeling it lazy. When you allow yourself to slow down without being called a failure. When you allow yourself to be silent without believing it makes you less valuable. And then a new kind of strength begins to grow, not from tightening, but from softening. You no longer strive for perfection in order to rest. You rest because you're worthy. You stop waiting for permission. You give it to yourself to live at your own pace. You no longer need a perfect excuse to say no. You say no because no is also an act of self-love. And maybe, for the first time in years, you walk away from the mirror, not to check if you're pretty, but to whisper, today, you don't need to be better. You only need to be kind to yourself. Healing doesn't come from trying harder. It comes the moment you stop fighting with yourself. There are memories that no longer make you cry, but still cause your heart to tighten. An old street, a familiar phrase, a photo that unexpectedly surfaces from years ago. They don't hurt you, but they're not fully healed either. They still keep you there, gently but firmly, like a thin thread, tying your soul to an old version of yourself, a version who once fought to survive. You once thought you had moved on, that you had gone forward, that it's all in the past. But then, whenever something throws you off balance, a part of you resurfaces, reacts like it used to, even though today is so different. That's because the story inside you hasn't been rewritten. It's still the old narrative, with the old voice and the old conclusion. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. I was meant to be left behind. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The old story may not hurt you like it used to, but if it remains unwritten, it will still whisper in every decision you make. You'll keep rejecting yourself. Even when others open their arms, you'll keep missing opportunities because a part of you still believes, I will fail again. Rewriting the story doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It's not erasing, not covering up, not painting pain in pretty colors. It means retelling it from a new perspective. The perspective of the survivor, not the victim. The perspective of who you are now, embracing the one who once struggled to stay afloat. Imagine this. You meet the 16-year-old version of yourself, the one who just went through deep emotional pain. You wouldn't say to her, get over it. It wasn't that bad. You wouldn't shout, why were you so naive? You'd sit down, hold her hand, and say, you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. And I'm proud of you for surviving. Rewriting your story means doing that. For every old version inside you, the girl who loved the wrong person, the mother who lost control, the woman who silenced her own feelings for the sake of others, you stop hiding from them. You stop calling them mistakes. You give them a new name. The ones who protected me when I didn't yet know how to love myself. And from that moment, the past is no longer a prison. It becomes a lesson. You no longer fall back into the old memory when it resurfaces. You stand beside it and retell it with a wiser voice, a gentler voice, a steadier voice that knows, I don't live there anymore. Deep healing doesn't come from forgiving others quickly. It comes from forgiving yourself for not knowing how to leave sooner, for choosing to stay, for trying too hard to be accepted, for shrinking just to be loved. And then you begin to retell everything you've lived through, as if sitting beside the ashes, not to cry, but to gather the soft light still glowing in them. You rewrite, I was hurt, to I survived. I was foolish, to I believed with all my heart. I wasn't worthy, to I didn't see my value back then, but now I do. And maybe when someone asks you, how did you get through all that? You no longer tremble while retelling the story. You don't need to explain every detail. You simply glance into the distance, smile softly, and say, it doesn't hurt anymore. It's a part of me now, and I love that part too. You no longer tell your story to be pitied. You tell it to remind yourself that you came back brighter, fuller, deeper than ever before. You are no longer who you used to be, but you don't have to erase her. You only have to hold her and tell the story again, this time with a gentler voice. You spent a long time trying to become a version of yourself that was tidy, understandable, easy to accept. You once believed, if I'm clear enough, if I'm always steady, if I can explain everything I feel, then fewer people will walk away. So you wrapped yourself in an image, the one who knows what she wants, the one who is always kind, the strong one, the one who can handle it all. But there are days when everything still seems to follow the script, and yet your heart won't cooperate. You feel conflicted, joyful in the morning, exhausted by afternoon, laughing one moment, crying the next. You can't name what you're feeling. You can't explain why you're so tired. You can't manage like you used to. And you begin to worry, why am I so overwhelmed? Why do I feel so messy? What's wrong with me? But no, there is nothing wrong. You've just entered the territory of truth, the place where there are no ready answers, where no one hands you a map, where your soul can no longer tolerate comforting words that ring hollow. Carl Jung once said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off the dark, but by embracing all of life's opposites within oneself. You don't need to be perfect to be on the path of healing. You need to be real, even if real means messy, half light, half shadow, half letting go, half still holding on. You begin to understand healing isn't about becoming a finished person. It's about allowing every part of yourself to be here without judgment. The part that trusts and the part that doubts, the part that's full of life and the part that wants to disappear, the part that forgives and the part that still aches. And strangely, when you stop trying to fix the contradictions in yourself, when you simply sit beside them, something sacred begins to happen. You are no longer split in two. You are no longer good or bad, no longer healed or unhealed. You are a person living truthfully, within all the layers of emotion you never allowed to exist at the same time. You can be both grateful and grieving, both forgiving and setting boundaries, both strong and tender. And that doesn't make you confusing. That makes you human. Once you chose a clean version of yourself to present to the world. You trimmed down your feelings. You edited out the unripe pieces. You labeled your heart stable while it was still learning how to heal. But now, you no longer need to hide, not to display your chaos, but to no longer feel ashamed that some parts are still unraveling. You realize there are wounds that don't need to be fully healed. They just need to stop being hidden. You sit with yourself, not to solve a puzzle, but to whisper. I may not have all the clarity. I may still be confused, and I am still worthy of love. Wholeness doesn't arrive when you're complete. It arrives when you stop rejecting parts of yourself just because they're inconvenient. And then you stop demanding that you must look like someone else to feel at peace. You accept yourself, even when nothing inside feels peaceful. Healing is not about answering every question. It's about learning to stay with yourself when there are no answers yet. You no longer wish for emotional stability. You wish to stay present with yourself, even in the emotional storm. And from that, a new foundation begins to form within you. A foundation not born from control, but from permission. There is a very small but deeply important shift in the healing journey. It doesn't come from reading another psychology book. It doesn't come from a deep meditation session. It happens in the moment you feel triggered but no longer react immediately. In the past, when someone said something that hurt you, you might have tried to stay calm and then broken down when you were alone. Or you snapped back to avoid being hurt again. Or you smiled and pretended it was nothing and then couldn't sleep that night. Reaction is a defense mechanism, especially for women who've lived in unsafe or invalidating environments. You developed an incredibly sharp sense of alertness. You could hear the threat under a gentle tone. You could feel the coldness in a kind smile. You were used to defending yourself instantly. But then, one day, you stop reacting the way you used to, not because you've forgiven, but because fear no longer controls you. You still feel pain, but you don't scream. You still feel hurt, but you no longer need to win. You pause. That's the moment you know integration has begun to take root. Carl Jung once wrote, "Strength is not in being unhurt, but in no longer being led by the fear of being hurt." Reaction is instant, a reflex from the wound. It doesn't involve choice. Response is an action that comes from a steady center within. You're not swept away by the emotion. You witness it. You hold it like holding a trembling child, and you respond from a place of self-kindness. You don't say something you'll regret. You also don't swallow what causes you pain. You choose to stay with yourself before engaging with anyone else. The beautiful part is, no one else notices. On the outside, it may look like you just paused for a few seconds, but inside, a whole battlefield has gone quiet. You no longer panic when you're misunderstood. You no longer feel the need to correct everything. You no longer seek someone's agreement to validate your worth. You accept what cannot be changed, and you choose actions that align with long-term peace instead of reactions that win the moment. You begin to understand you don't have to silence every emotion. You just have to learn how to hold its hand without letting it drag you. Like standing in the middle of a storm, and for the first time, you don't run. You stand, not to fight the wind, not to flee. Just stand and breathe. And from that place, people start responding to you differently too. They no longer see you as easily shaken. They can't pull you into endless debates. You're no longer caught in their drama. You become a space calm, steady, unafraid. You no longer need to have an answer. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to protect your image. You only need to protect your center. And from there, the choices you make begin to change the world around you. Not loudly, not forcefully, just steadily. I no longer react. I step back. I choose from a heart that no longer fears. There was a time when you connected with others out of need. You needed someone to listen. You needed to be loved. You needed to feel worthy in someone else's eyes. And so you accepted relationships that weren't real, where you had to stretch yourself to be accepted, where you were only loved when you were the pleasant version, where you quietly endured just to avoid being left behind. But then, as you began returning to yourself, something subtle started happening. Some people began to drift away, not because you pushed them out, but because your frequency had shifted. You no longer resonated with connections built on lack. You were no longer playing the same roles, and that changed your entire energetic field. You started connecting from wholeness, not from emptiness. You no longer sought someone to fill a void, but to be present with. You stopped chasing people who couldn't see you. Instead, you slowed down to listen for those who were truly listening back. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make peace with your inner world, you will continue to meet people who reflect your unrest." And suddenly, you understood not everyone who hurt you was bad. They were mirrors reflecting the wounds you had not yet faced. As you began to heal, the mirror changed shape. You no longer felt drawn to those who made you feel not enough. You found yourself withdrawing from shallow conversations, no longer interested in chatting just to be polite. You began to choose silence on a quiet afternoon rather than be surrounded by noise from people who didn't truly see you. And then new people began to appear, not loudly, not intensely. They came like the breeze, but carried a kind of safety you had never known before. They didn't need you to be dazzling. They embraced you even in your not quite ready state, because you, too, had learned to accept yourself that way. Every new relationship was now the result of the integration happening inside you. You no longer attracted the old scripts, because you had stopped performing the old roles. Once, you feared being alone. You held on to mismatched people just to avoid the emptiness. Now, you know, being alone is not as frightening as abandoning yourself just to stay. You began redefining boundaries, not to shut people out, but to protect the energy you're rebuilding. You say no gently, without long explanations, because you no longer feel guilty for choosing yourself. You also began to hear the true frequency beneath words. Under the phrase, "I care about you," you could sense control. Under, "I'm always here," you could feel whether it was genuine or not. You're no longer easily swayed, not because you're cold, but because you've come to know the value of true presence. You no longer seek people to fix you. You seek those who will sit beside you in stillness without trying to change a thing. From there, relationships stop being places to prove yourself. They become spaces to breathe together, to be seen, to be heard, and to be yourself without effort. When you are no longer fragmented within, you stop attracting relationships that ask you to split yourself apart, and you realize the deepest healing doesn't just shift your inner world, it quietly cleanses your outer relationships, leaving only what is true. No one ever taught you that. One day, when the healing journey goes deep enough, you will become quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from resignation, not the silence of losing faith, but a very different kind of quiet, the kind that only arises when you've stopped fighting yourself. You begin to speak less. You no longer feel the need to explain everything. You don't feel the urge to defend your perspective. You stop trying to justify your existence. You're still here, still living, still breathing, but with a very different energy. The energy of someone who has stopped running and dares to be still with herself. Once you spoke to be seen. Now you're silent and still. Your presence is felt. People can't quite name what has changed. Only that when you walk into a room, everything seems to slow down. Not because you're trying to stand out, but because you're no longer creating noise. You don't need attention. You don't need the spotlight. You are your own center of peace. Carl Jung once said, "When the inner voice becomes still, you no longer need the world to be loud in order to feel you exist." And you begin to understand, silence isn't the end point of healing. It's the natural state that arises when there's nothing left to hide. You no longer need to perform knowledge, no need to overshare, no need to say enough for someone to get you, because now you get yourself. Your body quiets too. The chronic tension in your neck, shoulders, spine begins to ease, not because you're meditating more deeply, but because you no longer brace yourself in every interaction. You breathe fully, not just to stay alive, but as if each breath is a way back home. You drink water slowly. You eat presently. You sleep deeply because you no longer have to stay awake guarding yourself. You move through the world as if carrying a secret. No one knows it, but everyone feels it. Something ancient, luminous, and deeply human. Something that makes others want to sit near you, even without a word. Once you used to speak, so people would understand you. Now, your quiet makes others listen more. You no longer emphasize what's right. You just speak from what you know is true, and everything false falls away on its own. You're no longer running, not because you've arrived somewhere, but because you've realized there is no destination other than being fully present here and now. You no longer try to be the light, yet people feel warmth near you, not because you're giving anything away, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. You're no longer good just to please. You're no longer quiet just to appease. You choose stillness because it's your true frequency in this moment. And then something strange begins. People who never listened before start paying attention when you speak. People who once dismissed your presence slow down when you look at them with understanding eyes. You no longer have to fight for a voice. You don't need approval. You simply radiate, not radiate light, but radiate truth. A kind of presence that doesn't raise its voice, doesn't try to convince, but inspires others to be more honest with themselves just by being near you. You're not perfect. You still make mistakes. You still have tired days. You still feel lost. But you don't punish yourself for any of it anymore. You let things come and go, like the wind. You don't turn emotions into problems to fix. You simply stay with yourself as they move through. You begin to see life with different eyes, less judgment, less categorizing, less expectation, more compassion. You no longer need to name this process. You don't call it healing, awakening, or personal growth. You just know you're living differently now, more naturally, more truly, more lightly. The silence in you doesn't make you disappear. It makes you so fully present. The world can no longer ignore you. And if someone asks, "What did you do to change so much?" you might just smile and whisper, "I stopped running. I stopped performing. I stopped rejecting myself. I stayed, and I began to truly show up." If you've stayed still until this very moment, perhaps you, too, feel that you're no longer the person you were when this began. Not because you've figured something out, not because you've received all the answers, but because you've just touched a quiet place, one you've unknowingly been avoiding all this time. That quietness doesn't live in books. It doesn't live in advice. It doesn't live in quotes that have been repeated too many times. It lives in the deepest part of you, where your soul has always been waiting for you to return, silently, patiently, without judgment. You don't need to understand everything to feel peace. You don't need to forgive everyone to feel free. You only need to stop punishing yourself. You've walked through pain. You've survived. And that is sacred enough. You don't need to become a better version of yourself. You only need to be more honest with the one you are right now. If, at any point in this journey, there was a sentence that softened your heart, a moment that made you close your eyes and breathe a little deeper, then maybe you don't need to keep searching. You are already on your way back. No need to rush. No need to push. No need to arrive. Just choose each day to stay with yourself a little longer, to be a little kinder to the parts of you still learning how to speak. You are not broken. You are just remembering who you were before the world taught you who you should be. Thank you for listening, not to me, but to yourself, through the sound of your own voice, rising from within. And if one day you forget again, if you find yourself bracing, reacting, feeling small once more, come back here. Just one passage, one breath, one whisper. Because peace is not something you find, it's something you remember the way back to. You don't need to prove that you're worthy of love. You only need to sit down and love yourself before anyone else even gets the chance to see you.